there's technically two different forms of reward. There's consumatory reward. And so that's the reward. That's what an orgasm is. It's consumatory reward. It brings the behavioral and perceptual sequence to a halt. It ends it, right? At the climax, it ends it. But then it's over. That journey is over, right? Then there's the dopaminergic reward that Sapolsky was talking about. And dopaminergic reward is evidence of advancement towards a goal. Right. Okay, so there's a corollary to that. Well, how do you become optimally engaged? Because dopamine facilitates engagement and focus, which is why drugs like amphetamines can be used for kids who are attention deficit disordered. You tap up the dopamine response, they lock on, right? Okay, so they're locking on to a goal-directed pursuit. The problem with amphetamines is that they can lock you on so hard you can't get out of the frame. So like kids on amphetamines will obsess, for example, about cleaning up their closet. They can't switch to the next activity. Okay, dopaminergic reward is reward that's accrued in relationship to a goal. Okay, so what's an implication of that? Well, pursue the highest possible goal. Well, why? Because the kick from advancement is higher. Now, you have to balance that. It can't be, you have to advance, right? Because imagine the reward's got two components. Number one is you're moving towards something valuable. Okay, so you want it to be as valuable as possible. Okay, but you have to be moving. So it can't be so valuable that it's out of your reach.
If you're going to walk to the moon, I'm not going to be able to see every single increment that I make.
Yes. You want to get to the moon, that's right. You can't walk there, so it's a bad plan. You need something extremely valuable that you can move towards. Okay, so part of the reason that you establish a relationship with God, let's say, is because that's what sets the upper bound to your vision. It's like, I want things to be the best they could be. That's a vision of paradise. Well, that has to be fractionated into, your proximal decisions, but lurking behind that should be this continual movement towards, what would you say, a heaven that recedes as you approach it. That's the proper vision of heaven. A heaven is a place that's perfect and getting better, both at the same time. That's what music shows you, because a great piece of music is perfect, but it's just getting better as it unfolds. And you need that. This is part of the problem with a static utopian vision, something Dostoevsky criticized. If you gave people nothing but consumatory reward, he famously says, so that they can do nothing but sit in tubs of hot water, eat cake, and busy themselves with the continuation of the species, human beings would break that all to hell in a moment just so they have something interesting to do.
What was that quote that you said on Rogan years ago? If we were to make the world sufficiently perfect, the only desired lack would be for the desire of lack itself. What's that?
That's Kierkegaard.
What's the proper? Can you remember the proper?
Well, Kierkegaard pointed out that as we make the world easier and easier, so this is perhaps part of the problem with the material plenty that's at hand, is that at some point, what becomes lacking is lack itself.
Yes.
Right, yes, exactly. It's optimal deprivation. And if everything is delivered to you on a platter, it's like, what the hell are you even doing there? This happens in the story of Abraham. So Abraham, who's the father of nations, right? So Abraham gets it right. He has everything at the beginning of the story. He has rich parents. He's got nothing that he has to do. He's like 70 when the story opens. He's been taken care of hand and foot his whole life. And the voice of God comes to him and says, I'm the God of your ancestors, telling you, get out of your zone of comfort. Get out into the world. And Abraham's pretty old by this point, but for whatever reason, he decides that he's going to forego the comfort for the adventure. And then as Abraham progresses, he makes the requisite sacrifices, each becoming more difficult as he ascends. And he adopts this pattern of relationship with the God that calls him to adventure, that literally makes him the father of nations. And so you can even think about that biologically if you want. You might as well. People like Dawkins think reproduction is sex. And that's why he can talk, for example, about the selfish gene making itself manifest in sex. Reproduction isn't sex. Sex is a necessary but insufficient precondition for reproduction. Abraham adopts a mode of being, a sacrificial mode of being, that establishes the optimal environment for his sons, who then establish the optimal environment for their sons, and their sons, and their sons. So you can imagine that what Abraham is doing, this is what the story means, is he's adopting a mode of behavior that works best, all things considered, across multiple generations. And he sacrifices everything to that. It's this incredibly expansive vision.
Where should they go to encourage them to find difficult things?
Truth. Truth is what's optimally difficult. The truth is optimally difficult. It's a really wonderful thing to know. The truth is adventure. There's no distinction. Partly because if you're going to just say what you believe to be true, you have to let go of the consequences. You can't predict the consequences. Well, there's no difference between not being able to predict the consequences and having an adventure. They're the same thing, right?
Because
so
if you knew the
consequences,
consequences, it wouldn't be an adventure.
It's not an adventure if the consequences are foregone.
The same as it's no sacrifice or courage if there's no risk.
Right. It's exactly the same. And so it's a wonderful thing to know that optimized adventure is to be had in the truth. Think in every given situation. So Christ says in the Sermon on the Mount that to orient yourself properly, and it's often viewed as this hippie paean, take no thought of the morrow will take care of itself. God takes care of the sparrows, he'll certainly take care of you. It's like a hippie wet dream. That isn't the core of the message. The core of the message is very straightforward. Christ says, aim up to the highest thing you can possibly imagine. So that's the relationship with God. You put what's at the pinnacle, properly at the pinnacle, and you aim at that. And then you concentrate that, and it's that, and treating other people like you would like to be treated yourself. That sets the moral frame. Then you attend to the day and the cares of the day. It's like once you've established the proper moral frame, you pay attention to the day and you live in truth. And that moves you towards that destination. You have to have the orientation right. You have to be aiming up. But then it's just a matter of, what would you say? Abiding by the truth. That's the logos that sets people free. And that's right.
Doing it properly, right? There was one of the other rules that didn't make it into your book. Nothing well done is insignificant.
Right. Yeah, well, you accrue. So Christ tells his followers in the Gospels to store up treasure in heaven, not in the places that moths can eat and rust can destroy. Well, what is that? What is meant by that? Well, it's meant by it means the same thing that you just pointed to, which is that if you run yourself through a disciplinary process, so you accomplish something, maybe you don't attain the goal you were aiming at, but you accrue a new way of looking at the world and a set of skills. Well, if you just keep doing that, you have multiple ways of looking at the world and more skill. Well, that's your storehouse of treasure. The reason women use wealth as a proxy for attractiveness is because wealth is a proxy for competence. It's not competence, because you can be rich and useless. Now, it's not that easy, but it can at least happen temporarily. But women use markers of wealth to assess competence. And the competence is the treasure, not the wealth. Because if you're competent, you could be thrown into the desert and you'll make it bloom.